My name is Catherine McDowell, and I'm an associate professor of Old Testament at Gordon-Conwell Theological Seminary in Charlotte, North Carolina.
Dr. Catherine McDowell. Kathy, good to see you. Thanks for being with us today on Exegetically Speaking.
Thanks for having me. It's a real treat.
We're going to be talking about your book, well, one that you co-authored along with Philip Towner, called The Rewards of Learning Greek and Hebrew, which is perfect but for this podcast because it's exactly what we're doing. We often talk about the payoff of reading Greek and Hebrew. The subtitle is Discovering the Richness of the Bible in its Original Languages. This is perfect, right up our alley. First of all, thanks for writing this book.
Well, it was a real delight, actually, and we have to thank the editors and the folks at Hendrickson for kind of dreaming it up and then approaching Phil and I.
Well, glad they did it. So they approached you to do the book. If you were to sum it up, what's kind of the big idea in the book? What are you trying to do?
We're really trying to encourage people that studying the biblical languages is very worthwhile in terms of understanding scripture, but also really in terms of ministry.
Now, is that in terms of preaching?
Yes, especially in terms of preaching and teaching.
Yeah. Seminaries have been sort of, a lot of them at least, have been lowering those expectations over the last 2 decades, I would think. What's happening at Gordon-Conwell in that regard?
Yeah, you're right. A lot of schools are letting go of those requirements because they're trying to maintain or increase their enrollment, and they think this is the way to do it. But at Gordon-Conwell, we're still very committed to original language work. Our students do a minimum of a year of Greek, a year of Hebrew. We also offer intermediate and advanced courses. And then they do a series of 3 Hebrew exegesis and 3 Greek exegesis courses as a minimum.
Wow, that's pretty good. I mean,
Mm,
compared to what's happening in a lot of places. I mean, we
yeah.
see the value, and that's a part of why we do this podcast, because we want to promote the study of biblical languages. We have people around the world that listen into this podcast trying to get the nuggets, trying to get a little bit of the thing. So is this a book of methodology, or is this a book of examples? How would you describe it?
Yeah, this is definitely a book of examples. And it's geared really towards folks who have not yet studied Hebrew or Greek or are just beginning that journey. We really just tried to give example after example of why it matters, what kind of a difference it makes, how it gives you just a deeper, richer appreciation of Scripture, understanding of Scripture. And, I think one of the most undersold reasons for studying Greek and Hebrew is the spiritually formative aspect.
Hmm.
It's not only formative because the languages are challenging. It forms you that way too,
Yeah,
but
yeah.
but just the closeness you get to the word itself really does have an impact on your own individual walk with the Lord, and it translates into your ministry so easily.
Hmm.
So I think it's not just an academic journey. It is that, but it's also a spiritual one, I would say.
Hmm. Randy Hatchett, as a theologian, was on with us recently on this podcast, and he was talking about the fact that in some cases biblical languages just slow you down. We read it at such a hurried pace sometimes that this allows you to see things in the texture that you wouldn't see otherwise.
Yes, absolutely. It does force you to slow way down and just help you become a much more careful reader.
Hmm. Well, you did the Hebrew portion, and
Yeah.
Philip did the Greek portion. That perfectly great and fair. 10 chapters altogether. Let me I don't want to go through all of them because I don't want to give the book away, right? I want people to go out and buy the book because it's great. And it's not long. It's what, 115 pages. Gosh, I knew it was short. I didn't realize that. Let me just give a couple of titles, and if you would just make a comment or two about, because they're fun in some sense. There's Adam, and then there's Adam. Is that
Yes.
fair enough to say? There's
Yes.
Adam, and then there's Adam.
Right. Exactly.
Yeah.
So we get the term Adam or Adam. It occurs multiple times in the early chapters of Genesis. And sometimes it's clear that it's referring to the man Adam, and sometimes it's clear that it's referring to humanity, which is the same Hebrew term, Adam. But there are a few cases where it's a little ambiguous, and
Mm,
so the translation involves some interpretation as well.
yeah. So whether it's Adam, the personal name, or Adam, the more generic for just human being, human person, is sort of contextual. You figure it out that way. But then there are some delightful places where it's just a little ambiguous, and it could kind of go either way. I love puns, and I just love. I have a rabbi friend that loves puns, and he's always punning. But chapter 8, puns are fun. I like it. Yeah. I mean, the rhyming is great. So give us an example of maybe a pun in Hebrew. A lot of times these things are lost when you move from one culture to the next. I remember one time I was preaching in a Filipino church, and I'd used a joke that I had used many times in America to lots of laughs. And then I gave my kind of joke in these different contexts, and it was crickets, right? Yeah. So, and then, just, and that's just what happens with humor. Right. That's what happens with puns in some cases. Give us an example.
Yeah, one of my favorite examples is in Kings, and I mentioned this in the book, 2 Kings 1, where Azariah has injured himself by falling out of a window, and he sends a messenger to Ekron to inquire of the god Baal-zebub whether or not he's going to recover. And it's interesting that when we look at some of the Canaanite literature from this time period, we don't actually see any indication that Baal was called Baal-zebub. He was probably called Baal-zevul, which is, instead of what it translates to, is Lord of the Flies. But the term he was known by was actually Prince Baal. And it's a very, very close spelling. The spelling is almost identical between the term for prince and the term for flies.
Flies.
I think what the biblical author has done is he knows that it's really Prince Baal, but he's instead changed one consonant. It's kind of the equivalent of a B to an L, I think, to make him Lord of the Flies and therefore kind of insult him.
Yes, an insult to these gods. Yeah.
And they love that kind of thing.
There's a lot of plays on words in Scripture that people just don't get if you read it in translation. Translations do the best job they can, but you can't really communicate those kinds of things, can you?
No, it's extremely challenging. Usually authors or translators have to resort to a footnote or something to explain it. It's really almost impossible to translate it sometimes.
I would love to give more examples, but I can't just simply because of time. But let me just read a few of the chapter names. Swift was the fall. Eden replicated when God uses italics. I like that. I really like that. Would the emphasis please move to the front is the question. And anyway, some great chapters. Really want to encourage people to go out. If you're interested in biblical languages, The Rewards of Learning Greek and Hebrew, Discovering the Richness of the Bible in its Original Languages, co-authored by Catherine McDowell and Philip Towner. Dr. McDowell, thanks for being with us today on Exegetically Speaking.
Well, thanks for having me. It was great to be with you.
If you learned too much today and your head is hurting, there's one sure cure. That is to share this podcast with a friend. We hope you've enjoyed Exegetically Speaking. If you have never visited Wheaton College, I hope you'll make plans to do so. We have a wonderful campus year-round. And if biblical languages are your fancy, check out our MA and BA programs at Wheaton College, wheaton.edu. Look for modern and classical languages. That's the best place to get started. If you have comments, you have questions, you just want to be in touch, please email us at exegetically.speaking@wheaton.edu. Thanks for all those who make this possible. You know who you are. Until next time, thanks for listening.